Hey guys, it's Matt from Train Sim Society and welcome back to the channel, or welcome if you're new. So today we're getting into all the small details that came about during the official roadmap stream, things that they revealed or talked about there, at least in greater detail, that weren't done in either of the roadmap articles or in the Dovetail Direct. So a lot of these things definitely add a lot of clarity for how TSW6 is shaping up, and I guess how we can manage our expectations for what we're expecting in the official release. But before we get into that breakdown, I want to start with a quick correction from my last video, more specifically the second part of the TSW6 roadmap, where I covered the future roadmap for what's coming after the release. When I was talking about the Class 805, I mentioned they were introduced in 2014. That is absolutely not correct. They were introduced in 2024. The article itself actually had the right information right there in front of my eyes as I was taking notes from it, but what came out of my mouth wasn't matching what my eyes were reading. This happens sometimes. It's usually just a dyslexic moment with numbers. I have this problem a lot. I apologize, and I do really appreciate those of you who correct me in the comments. Just know that if this happens, it's usually not because I have the wrong information. It's because sometimes my brain just isn't working and I misspeak, and unfortunately, sometimes I completely miss it in editing. So I appreciate the patience and corrections. I love you guys, and I will definitely try my best to keep those slip-ups at a minimum. But if they do ever happen, please always feel free to correct me. So with that cleared up, let's jump into the Riviera line in the Class 220 Voyager. Now, something really neat that came up during the stream is how the announcements are actually going to be handled. So they aren't just generic audio files. Each platform is actually going to have its own speakers placed within the world, and that is going to create this layering effect where you hear announcements more faintly coming from other platforms in the distance. And on top of that, on-train announcements trigger about 650 meters to be exact before you arrive at the station. Now, for me, that is going to make HUDless driving much more practical. I have always struggled with stopping distances and knowing exactly when to start braking at stations, and I am a player that does prefer the minimal HUD. But hey, if these announcements do fire consistently at the right distances, I think that's really going to provide a cue for when to start braking, and I can definitely experiment with what percentage of brake I need from that moment to get a nice comfortable stop without either crawling in too early or blowing right past the station. So I'm definitely very excited about this, and it sounds interesting the way that it's implemented. We also got more specifics on layering, which weren't laid out in the article. The Riviera line is going to be packed with variety. We have the HST in Class 166 from Great Western Express, Freight with the Class 66 from West Coast Mainline South, RHTT services, the Class 47 from Just Trains Preston to Carlisle, the Class 8 shunter movements at Lara Depot, plus rail tours like Flying Scotsman and the Class 52 Western. There is a ton here, more than just the two main units included with this route, so I'm glad that clarifications were made in regards to that. And one last thing that stood out, the Class 150 has been reworked with new physics and new sounds, and testers who were pretty unhappy with the Cardiff version of the 150 are actually much happier with this one, and the improvements are even going to be backported to Cardiff later. So those are definitely important details that were missed previously. There was also some clarification on the Voyager. They went with the Class 220 specifically instead of the 221. The 221 has different bogies, a slightly different cab, and of course an extra coach. So it wasn't just a matter of leaving one coach out. To do it properly would have to require building a separate train. So the 220 makes sense for this release, and Matt clarified those specifics during the stream. One thing I will say though, I was a little disappointed that we're still relying on the Class 66 as the main UK freight option here. I was really hoping that back before the official reveal of TSW6, maybe we'd get a brand new freight logo with TSW6 to break up that monotony, since this was highly requested. Unfortunately, it didn't happen, but hopefully one day it does. But for now, the Class 66 will continue to fill that role and continue its reign in UK freight operations. So now moving on to the Morristown line and the ALP 45DP. So the Aero 3 is included here, obviously, and they even call it by its nickname, which is the German Jersey Aero. The devs described it as old and clunky with odd controls that really make it feel different from the modern stock, and it really is. I've never actually ridden on one of these things, but I've rail fanned and I've seen them and heard them go by, and they are a relic of the past. And even though they are a relic of the past, they are still alive and kicking today, somehow, some way. So the ALP46 is also included, and it has a manually lapped brake system, so that is going to add another challenge when driving it. I know a lot of players who aren't familiar with this system might find it intimidating, but trust me, it is not too hard to learn. There are so many other trains that also have this system in game, I believe. It isn't really a percentage braking lever. You have to go into service, then back into lap to hold that desired pressure. And if you want to increase braking pressure, you have to go back into service, then bring it back into lap to hold it. So it definitely requires a little bit more in terms of skill. But the real standout detail here was the ALP45DP and how the dual mode system is handled. And this was something I wasn't actually aware of before the stream. I honestly always wondered why a dual powered train was necessary on this route specifically, since most of it is electrified out to Dover at least, but now it actually makes sense. Apparently, Hoboken doesn't allow you to switch modes in the station, so any service arriving or departing has to be in diesel mode. That means every run through Newark Broad Street requires a power change. So you switch into diesel before Hoboken and then switch back to electric after leaving. I think that's a really interesting operational detail, and they are simulating the full procedure here with alarms, voice prompts, engine startup, basically the entire process. And the difference is noticeable. On electric, the ALP45 handles the multi-level coaches without any sort of problems, and on diesel, it struggles a bit more, which is realistic. My only question though is whether the game will actually cue us on when to do the changeover, especially for players who aren't familiar with this procedure. I assume it will, but I will definitely be looking forward to testing all this myself in my first look at the DLC. They also confirmed AI Amtrak layers, which I do appreciate, but I was a little disappointed to hear they are AI only. I was hoping we'd actually be able to drive Northeast Regionals or the Acela at least down to Newark, since both services do stop there, but it seems as though that won't be possible. I'm also curious whether Newark Station itself will be fully modeled or just partly visible, but either way, at least the traffic will be there for immersion, and I feel like that's the most important part. One other thought I had, I hope one day we see the Aero 3 cars layered into the New York to Trenton route, because they do operate on that line in real life. I don't think it would be too hard to do, and if not officially, I could definitely see it becoming a community mod or a custom community timetable. So now on to Leipzig to Dresden and the BR294. The Leipzig to Dresden extension will add even more than the article suggested, and there's this constant switching between PZB and LZP depending on which part of the route you're on. I really like that because it will force you to interact with the train system more often rather than just locking into LZB the whole way, kind of the way that we do currently on the Kassel-Würzburg route. The Friedrichstadt branch will provide complete runs for S-Bahn and freight, so that's going to give more depth than just a longer main line. They did also clarify entitlements in the stream. If you buy Leipzig to Dresden, you will automatically get Dresden to Riesa added, which is important obviously because so much layering will depend on that add-on. And then we have the BR294. This loco is very different from shunters that we already have. It has short versus long modes for yard versus mainline use. The engine automatically cuts off after about 10 seconds if you stop, which will require a restart, so that's going to add some challenge. And it's not as powerful as a full mainline loco, but it is versatile enough to leave the yard when needed. So it's definitely going to fill the gap between the already existing BR204 and the 363, giving us more classic German shunter people have been asking for. Now, as far as core features, this is a long section. We got more details on random events. Signals might clear in 2 seconds, or it might take 20, and you won't be able to predict it. That same type of flexibility and unpredictability will also apply to temporary speed restrictions as well, and the length can change. So definitely expect the unexpected there. Now, for train faults, the devs stress that they will never be catastrophic. So you won't have a train fail permanently and before forced to abandon your run. That was something that they actually tested back in TSC on Donner Pass, and players hated it. So instead, every fault is recoverable with driver assist prompts guiding you through what to do, and the system is also extensible, so more faults can be added over time, and I hope they add even more to the random delays. I want to see things like weather-related delays, if the weather gets bad, if it starts snowing, if it's raining, if it's foggy. I want to see more things happening. Now for passenger ambience, I really like what they've done here with this. Oh my gosh, this was apparently created as an experiment by an audio engineer, so there is a brand new layer for passenger chatter. It changes depending on how many people are seated in that particular car or coach. If your train's nearly empty, you're going to barely hear a sound, but at rush hour when it's packed, the volume and complexity will increase. So you will really notice that rise and fall of conversation between coach. This does sound like a small detail, but this is going to change the entire atmosphere of sitting in a carriage, or at least walking through them. And since it works alongside the new announcement system, it's going to make the entire experience feel a lot more alive and immersive, especially if you're using conductor mode or potentially just riding as a passenger. That is, when conductor mode actually works correctly, because right now it is still pretty buggy, but when it does, these new audio layers should really help make it more enjoyable. As for announcements, I was impressed by how detailed they are. They aren't just generic across every country. In the UK, they'll be formatted in one way, in Germany another, and of course in the US, they'll be specific to how things operate here. There are different voices, male and female, with authentic accents. Each platform can be set up differently depending on the operator, and the system is flexible enough that third-party developers and possibly modders can take advantage of it. So I'm very excited to see what the community does with that. The one downside is that announcements won't be retroactively applied to older routes. They'll only be part of new content going forward. That is disappointing because I would have loved to hear them across the back catalog. At least the devs are doing it properly for new routes, so if they do expand it over time, I definitely feel like it should feel consistent and realistic. I also like that you can toggle announcements in the cab. Realistically, in a diesel locomotive, you probably wouldn't hear the announcements, but if you still want to, I guess you can switch them on. That's a small touch, and I'm glad that's something that they thought of, because that would have been a big player request. So for bundles and access, the stream actually explained why regional bundles aren't coming back. I was confused about that. I thought maybe I was missing something, or maybe they hadn't fully announced them yet, but there are actually no regional bundles this time around. So with the ability to just buy whichever route you want individually, regional editions don't really make much sense anymore. And honestly, I do see that angle. They also cautioned that the special edition is really only worth it if you've been away for a while and don't own much. If you already own a lot of content, it's probably not the best value anyway. So that pretty much covers everything. I'm sure there are smaller details in there, but I tried to get at least the most important bits of information for our major core routes and our major core features that are coming to TSW6. But I want to hear what you guys think. Are you excited about the announcement system and how it's being implemented? Do you wish it worked with older routes too? And what do you think about the ALP45DP's dual mode operation? That is so neat to me. Like, I'm actually so excited for that. And them going to Hoboken was a great idea because it takes all of this practice and just implements it in game. I also believe that from the frequently asked questions, the random events will apply to the back catalog. I'm not 100% on that, but I think I remember reading that. Definitely check that and make sure. But sadly, it's not going to work like that with announcements, but it sounds like random events at least will apply to the older catalog. So hey, at least we have something there. But let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you guys so much for watching, and as always, happy real simming, guys.